It was just an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind that promises little more than routine. The house lay wrapped in a soft, comforting silence. One of those rare, peaceful nights when the world seemed to slow down just enough for you to catch your breath. My partner, David, was away on a business trip, not expected back until the following morning. So, it was only Logan, my stepson, and me in the house. Logan's car was parked neatly in the driveway, the tires still warm from the drive. He was no longer a boy, not really. At 22, he carried himself with a quiet confidence, a subtle mix of strength and hesitation. Something about the way he moved these days suggested he was standing on the threshold between youth and adulthood, uncertain yet eager to step forward. After I set my bag down and slipped off my heels, a faint, familiar sound caught my attention, the gentle murmur of running water from upstairs. My intuition whispered that Logan was showering. Nothing unusual about that, but there was something else in the air, an indescribable tension that made me pause. A quiet anticipation stirring deep within me. I tried to shake off the feeling and distracted myself with a glass of water, convincing myself it would be just another unremarkable evening. But fate had a different plan. As I climbed the stairs, drawn by the subtle sounds, I reached the bathroom door and noticed a narrow gap, a small aperture where the door wasn't fully closed. It was then that I caught sight of Logan at the sink. He was shirtless, his back turned towards me, shoulders slightly stooped, his hands busy, with something I couldn't quite make out. There was something captivating about the moment. The way his movements were purposeful, yet delicate, as if he was carefully handling something precious. The light cast soft shadows on his skin, highlighting the curve of his muscles and the tension that seemed to run beneath. I stepped closer, compelled by an instinct I didn't fully understand. Without thinking, I reached out and helped him wash whatever it was he held. My hands brushed against his, and a current of electricity shot through me. I noticed how he occasionally held the object out, perhaps needing a moment's relief, and during those brief intervals, I found myself drawn to manipulate it gently, moving it up and down. The sensation was strange, familiar yet foreign, and it left me uncertain. My thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and forbidden curiosity. At that moment, the ordinary Tuesday evening transformed into something far more exhilarating, more intense than I ever could have imagined. The intimacy of that encounter, the silent communication between us, lingered in the air like an unspoken secret. I know this story is complicated, and I want you to understand that your support means everything to us. If you've been following along, but haven't yet subscribed, now's the time. Hit that button, turn on notifications, so you won't miss the astonishing twists that lie ahead. Because trust me, what happened next will change everything. As I stepped out of the house, a hollow emptiness settled inside me, a weight I couldn't quite place. It wasn't like the usual quiet moments that follow a goodbye or a long day. This felt different, heavier, like something was quietly unraveling beneath the surface of normalcy. I started climbing the stairs, each step echoing softly in the stillness, when I noticed something out of place. The bathroom door, usually shut tight, was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of light escape into the dim hallway. The gentle, steady sound of running water spilled out, clearer than ever before, and a knot of curiosity tightened in my chest. Drawn like a moth to a flickering flame, I hesitated only briefly before peeking through the narrow opening. What I saw stopped me cold, rooted me in place, as if time slowed down. Logan stood at the sink, his back turned to me, bare skin exposed where his shirt had fallen away. His shoulders were slightly slumped, weighed down not just by gravity, but by something I couldn't yet understand. His hands moved with a focused intention, busy with some task I couldn't quite make out. What struck me most was how different he looked. His pants sagged low on his hips, a casualness I'd never seen from him before. Logan was always so careful about boundaries, meticulous about his privacy. The bathroom door left ajar? It was almost unheard of. My heart pounded quietly as I processed the scene. For a moment, I wrestled with myself. Should I knock, call out to him, or quietly close the door and leave him to his solitude? Before I could decide, The door creaked beneath my shifting weight. Instantly, Logan spun around, eyes wide with surprise and something else, a flicker of alarm. "Oh, I didn't know you were home," he said quickly, almost stumbling over his words as he grabbed a towel, pressing it awkwardly against himself, as if to hide something. His voice trembled, raw and unsteady, far from the composed young man I had come to know. "I didn't mean to intrude," I murmured, quickly diverting my gaze to avoid the sudden flush creeping up my cheeks. But despite my words, I couldn't ignore the unease swirling in the air. I saw the deep crimson that bloomed across his face, watched as his eyes darted nervously downward, fixated on the towel clenched in his fist. "No, it's nothing," he insisted, but his voice cracked, betraying the tightrope of emotions he was balancing. There was a heaviness in his posture. His shoulders sagged, weighed down not by the physical world, but by some invisible burden. I remained frozen for a heartbeat, hands lingering on the edge of the door. Part of me wanted to respect his space, to retreat, and leave him unbothered. But a stronger, more insistent part of me urged to stay, to reach out, to bridge whatever distance had quietly grown between us. Softly, I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, the sound sealing us in a fragile bubble of shared quiet. "If something's wrong," I said gently, "you can tell me. I promise I won't judge." Logan's grip on the towel tightened for a moment, then slowly loosened. I braced myself, expecting silence. But then he exhaled, a shaky breath that seemed to carry the weight of unsaid words. He lowered himself onto the edge of the bathtub, his voice barely above a whisper, tinged with embarrassment and vulnerability. I leaned against the counter, trying to project calm, offering him an unspoken invitation to trust me. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," I assured him quietly. But sometimes, sharing what's on your mind can help lighten the load. In that moment, the strong, guarded facade Logan usually wore melted away, revealing the tender, fragile core beneath. It was a side of him he rarely showed, and I felt both honored and heartbroken to witness it. The silent trust in his eyes was fragile but profound, a silent plea to be seen, to be understood without judgment. And I knew, right then, that whatever was troubling him, I would be there to face it with him. Because sometimes, the bravest thing isn't hiding the pain, but letting someone in to help carry it. Logan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed not on me, but on the cold, worn floor beneath his boots. There was something deliberate in his gesture, as if he was gathering the courage to cross a boundary he rarely approached. For a moment, I simply watched him, surprised by the vulnerability etched across his usually stoic face. Guard Logan, the embodiment of strength and self-reliance, who bore the weight of the world with a stiff upper lip, was choosing to open a door he had carefully kept shut. It was rare, almost unheard of, for him to speak about anything personal. The fact that he had chosen to confide in me, of all people, felt like a quiet, fragile breakthrough. I softened my voice, careful not to sound intrusive, but genuine enough to invite trust. "What's on your mind?" I asked, my tone steady but warm. He hesitated, fingers unconsciously rubbing the back of his neck, a small sign of unease that betrayed the calm he usually projected. "It's about my body," he finally admitted, his words coming out in a rush, as though he'd been holding them in for far too long. "There's something off, something I can't quite explain. I don't know if it's serious or if I'm just overthinking it." The rawness of his confession stirred something protective inside me. It was clear this wasn't just a passing worry. This was something that had been gnawing at him silently, a burden he'd carried alone. I felt a sudden surge of compassion, admiring his courage for sharing even this much. "That takes a lot of guts," I said carefully, choosing my words with precision. "You're not alone in this. Everyone has moments when their health worries them. The important thing is you're paying attention. Do you want help? We can figure this out together." He lifted his eyes to meet mine, a flicker of relief mingled with lingering uncertainty shining through. "I wouldn't mind," he said quietly. "Good," I replied, offering a small, reassuring smile. We'll take it one step at a time." As we continued to talk, the tension that had clouded the room began to ease. Logan's words came slowly now, uneven and hesitant, punctuated by glances cast downward, as if afraid that speaking aloud might somehow make his fears more real. I listened intently, letting him set the pace, offering reassurance in the pauses. With each detail he shared, his voice trembled, a fragile thread unraveling the silence he had woven around his fears for so long. Around us, the small bathroom felt strangely intimate, the warm steam swirling from the sink, the faint scent of soap and clean linens wrapping the space in an unexpected comfort. In that moment, this ordinary room became a sanctuary, a quiet refuge where Logan's guarded walls could fall away just enough for trust to take root. He wasn't just confiding a physical worry. He was handing me a piece of himself that few had ever seen. And for the first time, it felt like the beginning of something deeper, a bond forged not just in duty, but in understanding and care. Logan sat quietly, twisting the edge of the towel between his fingers, his gaze fixed somewhere distant and undefined. After a long pause, he finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "I suppose I just don't know if it's normal," he said, his words hanging in the air like a fragile thread, trembling with uncertainty. There was no handbook for this kind of confusion, no clear instructions to follow or reassuring voices to turn to. Certainly, he wouldn't have chosen his father as a sounding board for these thoughts. The weight of his father's judgments and clipped remarks lingered too heavily, their unspoken meanings cutting through the quiet moments with a sharpness that was difficult to bear. Despite this, Logan and David maintained a cordial, almost easygoing rapport on the surface. But beneath that veneer was a chasm neither of them seemed able to bridge. A silent, invisible barrier that neither fully understood, let alone knew how to dismantle. I watched Logan carefully and decided to break the tension, my voice soft but steady as I leaned against the sink. "Sometimes, it's hard to talk about these kinds of things, even with the people closest to us," I said gently. "But the fact that you're willing to try, that in itself is something to be proud of. It's better than keeping everything bottled up inside, where it only grows heavier." He nodded slowly, though his face remained shadowed, guarded. "I just don't want to seem weird, or like I'm invading some space I shouldn't be," he murmured, almost afraid to say more. I smiled quietly, trying to ease the tension between us. "Everyone feels that way at some point," I assured him. "You're not weird, Logan. Actually, it takes a lot of courage to even say what you just did. That's more than most people manage." For a brief moment, his lips lifted into a small, tentative smile, and I thought I saw the tightness in his shoulders loosen just a little. But then the look in his eyes darkened again, and I knew there was more he wasn't ready to say. He finally whispered, barely audible, "I feel disconnected, like I'm not really myself. Like I don't belong anywhere. And I'm not even sure what's wrong with me." His words hit me hard. This was no surface-level worry. It was a deep, aching confusion that had been gnawing at him for far longer than he could admit. It was a crisis not just of identity, but of belonging and self-understanding. After a moment, I reached out and spoke with gentle conviction. "Logan, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just sorting through a lot of complicated feelings, and that's okay. Nobody has all the answers, especially not at your age. It's completely normal to feel lost sometimes." He looked up, eyes searching mine for some kind of truth or reassurance, and I meant every word I said. "I'll help you figure this out," I promised. "No matter what, we'll face it together. You're not alone." For the first time since our conversation began, something shifted. Logan's expression softened. He relaxed against the wall, still holding the towel, but now with less tension. Exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. "I've never talked about this before," he admitted quietly. "I doubt anyone would understand." I gave a small, knowing smile. Sometimes, we underestimate what others can understand. You might be surprised how much people are willing to listen if you let them. But it's also okay to be careful about who you open up to. Not everyone needs to know everything. He nodded again, this time more assured, the flicker of hope in his eyes unmistakable. "Yeah, that makes sense," he said softly. In that moment, the room felt a little less heavy, the silence between us warmer, filled with the quiet promise of trust and understanding yet to come. The conversation between us shifted gradually, moving away from the weighty burden of Logan's initial fears toward more grounded, practical matters. I try to keep my tone light and steady, offering advice drawn from my own experiences, all the while careful to avoid even the slightest hint of judgment or awkwardness. I wanted him to feel safe, to know that this was a space where he could be himself without fear. As we talked, I noticed a subtle but unmistakable change in Logan. The usual wall of guardedness, the carefully constructed barrier he always carried, seemed to crumble, piece by piece. In its place emerged something fragile, tentative, yet promising, a cautious openness. It was as if he was not only allowing me to see him more clearly, but also beginning to see himself in a new light. This vulnerability was rare, and I could tell it took tremendous courage. Throughout our conversation, I became aware of his growing arousal, his gaze lingering on me with a complexity of emotions that was difficult to read, but impossible to ignore. Given my gender, this was somewhat expected. Yet I found my own reaction to it surprisingly neutral, not fascination, not discomfort, but a kind of professional detachment mixed with curiosity. I found myself taking on a role I hadn't anticipated. When it became necessary, I helped him, washing, gently holding him. And in those moments, when I carefully manipulated him, moving him up and down, a flicker of uncertainty crossed my mind. What did this mean? Was I crossing a line? But deep down, I sensed this wouldn't be the last time I'd find myself in this position. Time slipped by almost unnoticed. What had felt like hours of talking eventually began to slow, and the tension that had filled the cramped bathroom space gradually melted away. In its place settled an unexpected calm, a quiet peace that neither of us dared to disturb. Logan looked at me then, his eyes soft and glistening with unshed tears, a mixture of gratitude and relief shining through his exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible but sincere. "I never thought I'd be able to talk about this with anyone." I smiled warmly, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. Reaching out, I gently stroked his shoulder, hoping to convey more than words ever could. "I'm glad you did. And remember, you can always come to me, no matter what. Whatever you're going through, I'm here for you." He nodded silently, the shimmer in his eyes betraying a torrent of emotion he wasn't ready to voice. As I stood to leave, I felt a strange, complicated mix of feelings swirling inside me. Relief that he had finally trusted someone enough to open up, pride that I could be that person, and yet a nagging sense of unease. This moment, raw and honest as it was, felt like only the beginning. I knew Logan's struggles ran deeper than what he had shared, and I wondered how long it would take before he was ready to confront the rest. But for now, in this quiet aftermath, there was simply this fragile connection. Two people, momentarily unguarded, sharing a truth that neither could forget.